The moment Ezra Voss walked into the Cavendish Group's private dining floor, every conversation in the room died. Not gradually, not politely. All at once, like someone had pulled the plug on a speaker mid-song, the waitstaff, the sommelier, the two junior associates from the mergers team who'd been laughing too loudly by the window. All of them went still, the way prey animals go still when something larger enters their territory. Nora Finch noticed it before she saw him. She was standing near the service alcove with a tray balanced against her hip, mentally calculating whether Table 6 needed their water refilled before the appetizers came out, when the silence fell over the room like a drop in barometric pressure. Her shoulders tightened. She turned. He was already looking at her, not in the way that meant anything flattering. Ezra Voss looked at everything the way a man looks at furniture he's considering replacing, assessing, dismissing, moving on. He was in his mid-40s, dark-suited, the kind of controlled stillness that didn't come from peace but from the complete absence of fear. Two men flanked him. Not bodyguards in the obvious sense, no earpieces, no visible hardware. But the way they moved told Nora everything she needed to know about what their actual job was. She had worked the private dining floor at the Cavendish for 3 years. She knew who came through those doors: politicians, hedge fund managers, the occasional foreign dignitary, with a security detail that made management nervous. She knew the taxonomy of powerful men, the ones who needed everyone to know it, and the ones who simply were it. Ezra Voss was the second kind. She'd heard his name, of course. Everyone in this city had heard his name, even if most of them didn't say it above a murmur. Voss Capital on paper, Voss Syndicate in the rooms that didn't have windows. He'd reportedly restructured half the city's port operations inside of 2 years, and no one had been able to explain quite how. The kind of man whose Wikipedia page was conspicuously thin. Nora squared her tray, adjusted her posture, and walked toward Table 3. This was her job. She did her job. "Good evening," she said, setting down the water glasses with the kind of quiet efficiency that made people forget she was there. "Can I start you with still or sparkling?" Voss didn't look at the menu. He was looking at his phone, or pretending to. One of the flanking men, younger, jaw like a shovel blade, glanced at Nora with the particular blankness of someone who had been trained not to acknowledge service staff. "Still," Voss said. She poured. She moved to the second glass. "You've seated us near the kitchen." She paused, not because the statement surprised her, but because she was calibrating how to answer it. The statement wasn't a question, and it wasn't entirely accurate. They were adjacent to the service hall, which was not the same thing, and it was the table his office had specifically requested when they'd called ahead that morning. "Your assistant requested this table when she made the reservation," Nora said. "She mentioned you prefer the east wall. If you'd like something different, I can check with the host. A beat." Voss looked up from his phone for the first time. The look was brief. But Nora had the unsettling sensation of being measured very precisely. "Leave it," he said, and returned to his phone. She left it. She completed the water service, recited the evening specials in a clean, unhurried voice, and retreated to the alcove. Her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady. She was quietly proud of that. The first 20 minutes were unremarkable. Voss ordered without looking at the menu. He'd apparently been here before, or he simply made decisions without needing options, and his 2 associates followed his lead. The conversation at the table was low and clipped, the kind that stopped whenever she came near and resumed the moment she stepped away. She didn't take offense. That was also part of the taxonomy. It was when she brought the entrees that it happened. She set the first plate in front of the associate on the left, moved to the right, and then reached across to place Voss's order. The dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, the truffle reduction on the sides he'd specified, and as she did, her elbow caught the edge of the bread basket. It didn't fall. She caught it, immediately, one hand shooting out with the reflexive precision of someone who'd carried trays for a decade. Nothing touched the table, nothing was disrupted. A half-second of imbalance, corrected so quickly it was barely visible. But Voss had seen it. "Tell me," he said, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone accustomed to rooms going quiet so they could hear him. "Do they hire servers by weight here, or did you just get lucky?" The table went silent. Not the whole room. Not this time. But the silence at table 3 was absolute. The younger associate shifted almost imperceptibly in his seat. The other man examined his fork. Nora straightened. She set the bread basket down. She looked at Ezra Voss with the same expression she used when a supplier tried to shortchange a delivery. Clear-eyed, unhurried, utterly unmoved. "I'm not sure what the hiring criteria are," she said. "I do know they keep me because I haven't dropped anything in 3 years." She paused exactly 1 beat. Until tonight, the streak was actually quite impressive. The younger associate made a sound that he immediately converted into a cough. Voss's eyes didn't change. Whatever was behind them, anger, amusement, something else entirely, it didn't reach his face. He picked up his fork. "The reduction," he said. "Is it on the side?" "It is good." He cut into the steak. She walked away. In the alcove, Kieran, the floor manager, 22 years old and perpetually on the edge of a panic attack, materialized at her elbow. Did he just? "He made a comment," Nora said. I responded. "It's handled." "Nora, that's Ezra Voss. I know who it is. He owns buildings in this city, Kieran." She turned to look at him. She made her voice very calm and very final. "It's handled. I need you to go check on table 7. They've been waiting on the second bottle for 11 minutes, Kieran went. Nora refilled her water pitcher and returned to the floor. She told herself the tightness in her sternum was nothing, just adrenaline, the biological residue of a conflict that was already over. She had handled worse than a rich man with a mouth. She'd handled far worse. She told herself she wasn't thinking about it anymore. She was, in fact, thinking about it constantly. Not because it had broken her, it hadn't, but because of the way he'd said it. That particular brand of contempt that operated in public, that didn't even bother to lower its voice, that assumed its own impunity so completely, it didn't even register the act as cruelty. It was the tone of a man who had never once in his entire life been required to account for himself. She refilled table 7's wine. She checked on the two-top by the window. She circled the floor with her face composed into the pleasant professional neutrality she'd spent years perfecting. She was good at disappearing in plain sight. She had always been good at that. By 9:15, table 3 had finished their entrees. The associate with the jaw was on his second scotch. The other man had barely touched his food, but was now in what appeared to be an intense, whispered phone conversation, one hand shielding his mouth. Voss himself had gone still in a different way than before. Not the still of a predator at rest. The still of a man receiving information he didn't want. Nora noticed, because she noticed everything, and because noticing things was the reason she'd managed to keep this job for 3 years, despite the fact that her feet hurt every night, and the health insurance was technically adequate, but only technically. She noticed the way his jaw shifted when the associate with the phone leaned over and said something brief and low. She noticed the way his hand, which had been resting loosely on the table, closed into a loose fist and then deliberately opened again. She noticed the way his eyes moved to the room's exits, not urgently, not obviously, but in the systematic way of a man who always knew where the exits were. Something was wrong. That was not her problem. That was very specifically not her problem. She took the dessert menus to table 6. She was returning to the service alcove at 9:27 when she heard the first sound. Not quite a shout, more like a sharp exhale amplified, from the direction of the private corridor that ran along the east wall. The corridor that led to the building's secondary entrance and the stairwell that the staff used. The corridor that was, at this moment, occupied by two men in dark clothing who had not come through the front of house. Nora stopped. The room had not noticed yet the ambient noise of dinner conversation, of silverware, of the jazz trio playing at half volume near the bar. It all continued, but Nora had a clear sightline to the corridor entrance from where she was standing, and she could see that one of Voss's associates, the one who'd been on the phone, had moved toward it, and that the two men in the corridor were not restaurant staff. She knew this because she knew all of the restaurant staff. She also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had grown up in a neighborhood where this kind of thing occasionally happened, that the object the nearer man was adjusting beneath his jacket was not a wallet. Her brain ran the calculation in approximately 2 seconds. Ezra Voss, still at table 3, had his back to the corridor. He was looking at something on his phone. He did not know. Nora Finch, who was not brave, who had always been the girl who stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed out of it, picked up a full water pitcher from the service station and walked directly into the private corridor. She hit the first man with the pitcher before he had time to register that she was there. Not in the head. She wasn't trying to kill anyone. She was trying to buy 30 seconds. But across the shoulder, hard enough to make him stagger and make enough noise that the situation was no longer a situation that could happen quietly. The second man grabbed for her arm. She was already stepping back. She was screaming for Kieran by name, loudly and specifically, because Kieran had a radio and Nora had exactly no other plan. What happened next happened fast. Voss's 2 associates were in the corridor within seconds. The men in dark clothing, there were apparently 3 of them, the third having emerged from the stairwell door, did not get the drop on anyone that they had been intending to get the drop on, because Nora had removed that possibility by being spectacularly, inconveniently present. There was a struggle. There was breaking glass from somewhere. There was a period of approximately 45 seconds during which Nora stood pressed against the corridor wall with the dented water pitcher still in her hand, and her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it, watching things happen that she would not describe to anyone later, would not think about clearly for weeks, and was choosing to categorize in this moment as not her department. And then it was over. The corridor was quiet. The jazz trio in the dining room was still playing, which seemed cosmically inappropriate. Nora's hands, she noticed now, were shaking. She heard footsteps and looked up. Ezra Voss was standing at the corridor entrance, looking at her. He was not rumpled. His jacket was straight. His expression was exactly as unreadable as it had been at the dinner table. But there was a stillness in him now that was different from before. The stillness of a man recalculating. He looked at the water pitcher in her hands. He looked at her. "You hit Carver with a water pitcher," he said. It wasn't a question. She understood this was him processing information. He was going to. She stopped. She thought about how to finish that sentence and decided it didn't need finishing. "Yes, Carver is 6'2". The pitcher was full, she said. "Physics helps." Something moved across his face. It was gone before she could name it. "You could have walked the other way," he said. "Yes, you didn't know what you were walking into. I had a reasonable hypothesis." He was quiet for a long moment. Nora was distantly aware that the corridor smelled like spilled wine, and that her left shoe had somehow gotten wet, and that her manager was going to be absolutely devastated by whatever was about to happen next. She was also distantly aware that she was having this conversation with a man she had, 45 minutes ago, genuinely considered pouring the water pitcher over for entirely different reasons. "Why?" he said. She thought about it honestly. Because she was constitutionally unable to give an answer she didn't mean. "I don't know," she said. "I think I just reacted. And then I'd already started, so I had to keep going." Voss studied her. The quality of his attention was different now. Before, at the table, she'd felt like furniture. Now she felt like something he was trying to understand and couldn't, and that the inability to understand it was genuinely bothering him. "Do you have any idea," he said slowly, "how many men in this city would have looked the other way?" "I don't know those men," she said. "I know this corridor." The silence stretched. She heard Kieran's voice somewhere behind her, talking fast and high-pitched into his radio. "You'll be compensated," Voss said. Something straightened in her spine. Not sharply, she was too tired for sharp, but definitively, "I don't want compensation." He blinked. It was the first involuntary thing she'd seen his face do. "I beg your pardon." "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I reacted to a situation, and the situation resolved. That's all." She set the dented pitcher down on the nearest shelf because her arms were getting tired. Though if you wanted to do something, a 5-star review of the restaurant would be nice. "Kieran's trying to make assistant manager, and he worries a lot." Voss stared at her. The man called Carver, who was apparently conscious and upright against the far wall, which was a relief, made a sound that might have been a laugh and converted it very quickly into a cough. "A review," Voss repeated. "The salmon here is genuinely excellent," Nora said. "It would be honest." She had a feeling, watching his face, that the last time someone had told Ezra Voss what to do with his resources in a tone that expected compliance, it had been roughly never. She had a further feeling that she should probably be more afraid of that than she was. She wasn't sure what was wrong with her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "What's your name?" "Nora Finch." "Nora Finch." He said it like he was filing it somewhere specific. "Do you make a habit of intervening in things that aren't your business?" "Not usually," she said. "Tonight seems to have been an exception." He nodded once, the way a man nods when he's reached a conclusion he wasn't expecting to reach. "Go home, Nora Finch," he said. "Tell your manager you had a family emergency. You'll be paid for the full shift. I told you I don't." That wasn't an offer. There was no heat in it. It was simply a fact being stated, with the same certainty gravity was a fact. "It's done. Go home." She wanted to argue. The part of her that had argued with him at the table, and felt something clarify in her chest when she did. That part wanted to push back, on principle, because she had never responded well to being told what to do by men who assumed she would comply. But she was also, she realized, completely exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her hands were still shaking faintly. The corridor smelled like something she didn't want to think about. "The pitcher needs to go back to the service station," she said. "Leave it." She left it. She didn't think about it for a week. That is to say, she thought about it constantly, in the background. The way you think about a song you can't identify, turning it over whenever she had idle moments, which wasn't often because she worked doubles on Thursdays, and the weekend branch rush was reliably punishing. She thought about the way he'd said, "Tell me." That opening, that particular register of cruelty that was so casual, it probably didn't even register to him as cruelty. She thought about the way she'd answered, the clarity she'd felt when she did, the absence of the apologetic softening she usually added to her sentences like a tax for taking up space. She'd been adding that tax her whole life. She was so practiced at it, she'd almost stopped noticing. She thought about the corridor. She tried not to think about the corridor. She was on the floor, 8 days later, running the Tuesday dinner service. And yes, it was raining. When Kieran materialized at her elbow with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. "There's someone asking for you," he said. "Front of house. I'm in the middle of." "He's asking for you specifically," Kieran said. "By name." She turned to look. Ezra Voss was standing at the host stand, without his associates, without the controlled distance of a man who owned rooms by stepping into them. Or rather, with all of that, but directed differently. He was looking at her. Nora set her tray on the service cart and walked to the front of house, because there wasn't, realistically, another option, and also because she was curious, and her curiosity had always been stronger than her self-preservation. "Mr. Voss, Ems, Finch." He looked at her the way he had in the corridor, that recalculating look. "Do you have a moment? I'm working." "I know. I'll wait." He said it without impatience, without entitlement. He said it like a man who had decided to wait and had therefore resolved all related questions. "I'll take a table at the bar if that helps." She looked at him. "What do you want, Mr. Voss?" Something shifted in his face, not softening. She doubted Ezra Voss softened, but a lowering of some guard she hadn't known was up. "I want to apologize," he said. The noise of the room continued around them. Nora was aware of Kieran hovering approximately 8 feet away, vibrating with anxiety. "What I said," Voss said, "at the table. It was." He paused, and she had the distinct impression he was choosing his words with unusual care, that this was not a man who had extensive experience with this particular sentence. It was contemptible. "I knew it when I said it. I said it anyway." He met her eyes directly. "That's not a behavior I permit in the men who work for me. There's no coherent reason I should permit it in myself." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You came here to tell me that," she said. "Yes, in person, during dinner service. You weren't going to accept a phone call from my assistant." That was, she realized, probably accurate. She folded her arms. "How do you know I wouldn't have?" she said. "Because you didn't take the money," he said. "And you asked me for a Yelp review." She heard Carver, standing near the door. She now noticed, because of course Carver was here, she doubted Ezra Voss went anywhere without at least one large associate, make the almost law sound again. "It's not Yelp specifically," she said. "Any platform." "I left one on 3 platforms," Voss said. 5 stars. I mentioned the salmon." She blinked. "You mentioned the salmon. It was excellent." She felt something shift in her chest. Some tight thing she'd been holding since the night in the corridor, the night before that, for longer than that. Some habitual bracing against the assumption that the space she took up was something that needed to be apologized for. And it didn't dissolve exactly, but it loosened. Slightly. Honestly. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Voss nodded. And then, because he apparently also did unexpected things, he said, "Have dinner with me." The ambient noise of the restaurant continued. "I'm working," Nora said. "Not right now. Another night, Mr. Voss. I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, with the directness of a man who'd decided to stop being careful with the words. "I'm asking you to let me prove that the thing you saw at that table isn't the whole of what I am." He paused. "I'm aware that's a significant ask, given what you also saw in the corridor. You have some context for what I am, and I understand if that context is disqualifying." Nora thought about the corridor. She thought about 30 seconds of her own life that she still hadn't fully processed. She thought about the way he'd looked at her afterward, not with the appraisal from before, with something that was trying to understand her and finding itself unable to, and taking that inability seriously. She had spent 31 years being easy to dismiss. She had spent 31 years making herself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient, and what had it gotten her besides very tired feet and a tray she was too good at balancing? "Thursday," she said. "I'm off at 10. Something happened in Voss's face, small, controlled, but she saw it. "I'll have a car here at 10:15, he said. "I'll meet you at the restaurant," she said. "I'll make my own way." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, the way he'd nodded in the corridor, the nod of a man who'd reached a conclusion, and turned toward the door. "Mr. Voss." He stopped. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the weight of everything that didn't need to be said yet, that would take time and honesty, and probably several difficult conversations to say properly. "The apology," she said. "It was enough. I want you to know that." Ezra Voss, the man entire federal agencies reportedly tiptoed around, the man whose name people lowered their voices to say, stood at the entrance of a mid-priced private dining room in his $6,000 suit, and looked at Nora Finch like she was the most confounding thing he had encountered in 43 years of life. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I had to come and say it." He left. The door closed. Kieran appeared at Nora's elbow so fast he might have teleported. Was he just? Did he? "Table 7 needs their check," Nora said. She picked up her tray. "And someone needs to refill the bread for table 2. She walked back onto the floor. Her hands, she noticed, had stopped shaking. They'd stopped sometime in the last 10 minutes, so gradually she hadn't caught the moment it happened, only the absence of it now. The steadiness, the quiet weight of her own palms, ordinary and sufficient. She refilled the bread. She ran the check to table 7. She did her job, the way she had always done her job, with the quiet competence of someone who had never needed anyone to notice. Tonight, she decided, noticing was enough.